Hey there, Hexers. This is Function here. So it's finally Friday, which means it's also finally time for me to reveal my spoiler. Man, I was so excited when I found out that I was going to get one. That totally made my day, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys. So let's look at the artwork real quick. You got a super cool dwarf shooting the robot. You know, when those robots get disobedient, you got to shoot them with the gun and give them a little zap and get them back in line. Alright, so there's the art. Let's see the card. You ready for it? Yeah. Shrewd Manipulation. That's my card. So it's a 2-cost, single sapphire threshold constant, and it says choose and discard 2 cards, ready or exhaust target artifact or troop. Just a heads up, in case you're not already aware, constants stay in play. You'll be able to get more than just one activation out of this card. You know, choosing and discarding 2 cards is definitely quite the cost to pay just for readying or exhausting a target artifact or troop. You can use it on one of your own, you could use it on one of theirs, but it's definitely a big cost. So how could this be a good card? Well, let's take a look. So here's at least 4 cards right off the bat that at least have some sort of PvP interaction. Unmerciful Tormentor is a 1/1 troop for 1. But if so long as you have no cards in your hand, he all of a sudden becomes a 4/4. Say you play Tormentor turn 1, you play your Shrewd Manipulation on turn 2, all of a sudden you got a 4/4 swinging in. Probably not the best play, but sometimes just getting in there with a 4/4 right out of the gates is pretty unstoppable. Alright, next up we got Alabaster Sphinx. And what that has going for it is, I'll read its text, is at the start of your turn, you may secretly choose a troop in your graveyard. If you do, an opposing champion guesses which troop you chose. If they guess correctly, put that troop into play under their control. Otherwise, if they guess incorrectly, put it into play under your own control. You could fill up your graveyard very quickly with a bunch of troops. You already have an Alabaster Sphinx in play, and now you're going to have a whole bunch of choices, and it's pretty unlikely that your opponent's going to be able to guess what you chose. Likewise, finally with Hex Engine, you're going to be able to use Shrewd Manipulation to ready Hex Engine, get some more resources, and accelerate yourself a little bit. This is definitely a little tricky, you know, because Hex Engine costs 4, Shrewd Manipulation costs 2, and so you might not be able to really ramp it up until turn 5. Now, if there's a way to get Hex Engine and Shrewd Manipulation out a little faster, you might be in good shape. Maybe you have a Technical Genius, or maybe you have a turn 1 Gearsmith and you're able to play the Hex Engine on turn 3, be looking pretty good. Alright, the last one up is Ash Harpy, and this is maybe where it gets at least semi-value out of it. So the way Ash Harpy works is when you play a non-resource card, if it's the second non-resource card you played this turn, you can put Ash Harpy back into your hand from your graveyard. So you could use Ash Harpy as kind of the fuel and Shrewd Manipulation as the engine, where you're just discarding Ash Harpies, playing a bunch of cards, getting the Ash Harpies back, discarding them again. So that would kind of work well if you had some sort of interesting thing. So what does Shrewd Manipulation really do? It falls under what I would call a combo card. It's kind of the engine piece. It's one of the main key ingredients that you're going to need in order to make a combo work. A lot of the time with combo cards, we might not necessarily get all the pieces we need in the same set. A lot of what's fun about combo cards is that, 2 or 3 sets down the line, they release a card, and maybe people won't even discover it at first, but it has this really interesting interaction with Shrewd Manipulation that maybe you're able to draw a whole ton of cards or do a whole ton of damage, do some interesting thing, take extra turns, who knows what. But that's what combo cards are all about. They kind of catch you by surprise. You forget that they even existed, and 2 or 3 years later, all of a sudden it's the best card in the entire game. Shrewd Manipulation has that potential. It's definitely a card where if you're activating the ability, you're going to be losing a lot of value by discarding cards and getting a pretty mediocre kind of benefit from it by just readying or exhausting something. But who knows, sometimes that's all it takes. Especially when it's only just a 2 resource cost, so you can play it pretty early. Generally, a lot of combo pieces, they need to have low cost because they have to be pretty flexible like that, and you're committing the resources into it, but it doesn't actually require resources to activate. So what are the 3 modes that this card basically has? First off, it could combo by untapping something repeatedly. Maybe you had something that drew you 2 cards by exhausting it, so you could keep readying it until you found the 2 cards you wanted, and you'd be in really good shape. Actually, you'd be able to draw through your entire deck until you found the exact card you wanted, so long as, you were able to draw 2 cards every time. Next up, you could use Shrewd Manipulation to just put something awesome in your graveyard. Maybe you don't even care about readying or exhausting anything. Maybe you're just trying to quickly empty your hand and put it directly into your graveyard so that you can bring a massive troop directly from your graveyard right into play on turn 3 or something and smash your opponent's face very quickly. Yeah, that's a pretty scary thought, and it's definitely something to keep in mind. Finally, like I was saying with Unmerciful Tormentor, you could use Shrewd Manipulation to empty your entire hand on purpose. Every once in a while, there's some sort of mechanic that relies on how many cards you have in your hand. Maybe your opponent is dealt damage based on how many more cards they had than you, and all of a sudden you empty your hand and they're taking like 7 damage a turn because they have a whole bunch in their hand. You could use it in all kinds of interesting combinations in that sense. If that was a card, you could be playing like Shrewd Manipulation and that Cerebral Fulmination, I think it's called, where each player draws more and more cards. So you're drawing more cards and throwing them away. Meanwhile, your opponent's drawing more cards and frantically trying to find something to do with them before they take a whole bunch of damage. I think that would be an interesting combo. Alrighty. What else are we looking at? Well, that PvP is not the only aspect of this game. You got PvE as well. Let's look at what the equipment is. So you have Dwarven Gun, which is when this constant enters play, draw a card. So you play Shrewd Manipulation on turn 2, you're going to draw a card, you're going to have maybe a little bit more fuel in order to use its ability, or you're just using it to replace itself. You know, cantripping without some benefit isn't necessarily the best thing in the world, but so long as you're able to utilize it, it might help you get there. Alright, the other piece of equipment is completely opposite end of the spectrum. Sacrifice this constant, put each exhausted opposing troop and artifact into its owner's hand. So this is kind of interesting, you know. I imagine a lot of the artifact decks are going to revolve around exhausting things in order to produce an effect. You know, we've already seen a lot of that. And if there was a raid deck or a dungeon where the computer is just exhausting all kinds of artifacts and putting more into play and doing all kinds of crazy shenanigans with this, Cog of Assimilation could very quickly wreck their entire day and just wipe their board. For 2 resources you're paying for a board wipe? I think that's not so bad, especially since it would be an instant speed board wipe. Alright, so speaking of board wipes, another interesting interaction with Shrewd Manipulation would be if you played Menacing Grolk. The way Menacing Grolk works is when it comes into play, it exhausts all the opposing troops and they're not able to ready on their following turn. So you could, in a sense, get like 2 full turns where they're not doing anything and then bounce all their creatures back to their hand by sacrificing with Cog of Assimilation. Another interesting one is Doppelgadget. So Doppelgadget has an equipment that lets it copy artifacts that are in your own graveyard. So if you were able to throw something really big away with Shrewd Manipulation, like say Argus Herald of Doom, and then copy it the next turn with Doppelgadget, all of a sudden you got an Argus for much cheaper than you might have thought. You know, there's a few other ones. I think there's like this one that prevents you from taking damage or prevents other troops you control from taking damage. That would be another good target for Doppelgadget to copy. And I kind of like that aspect of decks where you're building a toolbox deck and you can throw all your cards away and then choose what you want Doppelgadget to copy at any given point. Another one is grave robbing. So the way grave robbing works is you're able to take 3 troops out of your graveyard and shuffle them back into your deck. But the way it works with the equipment is that all those troops, their cost is reduced to 0. So say you had a troop that cost 1 million resources, you're able to shuffle it into your deck with grave robbing, and all of a sudden you're going to be actually able to realistically play that troop without generating 1 million resources, which is quite a task in its own. Finally, Void Marauder is a PvE card that gets cheaper based on how many actions you have in your graveyard. You could be able to fuel it out very quickly by, you know, kind of throwing away a bunch of actions and then using the ones that you still have resources for. Void Marauder would normally cost 10, but if you have 3 actions in your graveyard, all of a sudden it's only going to cost 4 and it's going to be very easy to play it. Also, Void Marauder with, I think, equipment is able to copy actions that are in your graveyard by playing one from your hand. So you say you played 1 burn, then it would copy it for every time it's in your graveyard. You could get like 4 burns for the price of 1, which is pretty sweet. Alright, next up I listed a bunch of other cards that have very minor interactions with Shrewd Manipulation. It's something to keep an eye on for the future. You know, so long as you kind of have your finger on the pulse, you might be able to find that combo the day it comes out. Or it might be sitting around for a year and then all of a sudden somebody realizes it's awesome. So you got Archmage Renlock, Bloodbear, Dream Dance, Hollowed Fields, Runts the Litter, and Polymorph Dingler. A lot of those cards enable you to pull cards back out of your graveyard. Some of them kind of escalate based on how many of a certain card you might have in your graveyard. They all kind of have an interesting effect, and go ahead and look at them. It's usually the equipment that kind of turns them on. And that's one thing I'm really excited about PvE is, for every card they design, they're really designing 3 separate cards because the equipment changes them so dramatically. Alrighty guys, so that just about wraps up my spoiler. I was really thankful that Cryptozoic sent me one. It totally made my day, made my week, and I'm already incredibly excited about the game, but it just meant a real lot to me. So I hope you guys enjoyed it too, and were able to share some of that excitement. So we're just days away from the alpha, and then we've got like 4 or 5 days left, and then we're going to finally see it. Definitely go ahead and visit the fan site forums on the official Hex site, because there's a whole bunch of other spoilers people have been doing this whole week, and mine was just one of them. Alright, so yeah, I just want to say one more big thanks to Cryptozoic. I really did appreciate it. Definitely hit the like button, and if you really like my stuff, hit the subscribe button, because I'm always putting stuff out. This week I put out way more than I think I'm going to usually do, but hey, you never know. If there's enough interest, I might just, keep churning them out for you guys. I really hope you enjoyed everything I did this week. On that note, if you're on Twitter, definitely follow me on Twitter. I'm at FunktionFails, and by doing so, I always post on Twitter as soon as I put out a video. That's probably the fastest way to find out if you want to see it when it's hot off the presses. Finally, there's a small chance I might be streaming during alpha. Well, actually, there's a pretty decent chance. I'll get you some more details about that next week. I'm not quite exactly sure what my time slots are going to be, but I'm definitely looking forward to it. Until next time, less fail, more function.